Welcome to the Pixel Retentive Podcast, where we, a business owner and an artist, discuss the business of art and the art of business.
Hey friends, I'm Carl, founder of Epic Made.
And I'm Ross, creative director at Epic Made. And we're the hosts of the Pixel Retentive Podcast, where we share our thoughts on creativity, art, and business. Past guests include Ben Burns of The Future, Pamela Bebry of Bebry Law, and Ruth Newberry of Cream.
We're forever grateful for the supporters of our podcast, and we're always looking for sponsors. That said, Pixel Retentive is brought to you by the creative gurus at Epic Made. Epic Made is a team of artists and strategists with a mastery of visual storytelling. Our studio makes unforgettable animation and graphic illustration infused with ideas that put money in your pocket. We best serve marketers and brands seeking to engage nerdy audiences, and some of our favorite clients include Nickelodeon, WWE, and Sci-Fi. Visit getepicmade.com and let's collaborate on your next creative campaign.
And with us today, we have Minta Carlson. Minta is an artist and creative who is leveraging the most advanced AI workflows to create art and tell stories. She's passionate about education and creation when it comes to the convergence between AI and art. Welcome, Minta. Pleasure to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, Minta. Cool. So, Minta, I know we've been doing this for a minute, and you and I are we've chatted quite a few times. I think you're probably the most informed person I know on the ins and out and technical details of AI. Before we jump more into that, I just wanted to let our audience get to know you a little bit better. So can you tell us how long you've been in your industry and the project you're most proud of so far?
Yeah. So I have been in the creative industry world for since my early 20s. I actually went to school originally for theater directing and design. And then within my 20s, I did the typical theater dance of going into a lot of different jobs, and I did quite a bit of web design for a while. I did different social media and marketing campaigns, so designs for that. And I also had quite a bit of an editorial background as well. So that was most of my 20s, mid to late 20s. And then I'm in my early 30s now, but just when I crossed this threshold of my 30s, I started getting into generative AI. I think around 2022 is when I started to really catch hold of it, and started learning how to train, or in the industry, you'd say fine-tune generative AI models, particularly for images, and built a business on that. Now I work with different clients through my business Promptcrafted, to basically help them identify the best workflows for them, figure out how to support their pipelines, make it easier for their art teams. Usually, especially for these smaller businesses or indies or startups, they have quite small art teams, and they really don't have the budget to expand the art team as much as they'd like to. So it's really difficult to compete with larger companies that have the budget for hundreds of artists. But what I really like about generative AI is it doesn't work as well without an artist, but if you have one or two really talented artists, you can get almost as much done as a massive art team. So I think what I'm most proud of, that's such a hard question. I really spent a lot of time figuring out how to make convincing character consistency with training AI models, and I did a lot of my own exploration around that. And I'm just proud of that work generally. I don't know. Project I'm most proud of is hard to say because I'm always working on new projects. So it's usually whatever I'm working on right now. And right now I just started working on a short film just on my own project, and I'm very excited for that and feel very proud of that. So yeah, it's not done yet, but I feel proud of it.
Awesome. Well, maybe it'll be done by the time we release this, and we can put a link out.
Yeah, maybe.
That'd be great. Awesome.
So, kind of piggybacking straight off of that, what we wanted to discuss this episode with you, Minta, was basically navigating, your expert advice on AI workspaces, how that might best integrate with our teams or artists, and maybe even creative business professionals, beyond just the art team, maybe on the strategic side. And then maybe some of the things to look out for, some of the pitfalls. I mean, there's a ton of concern around AI, not just from a sort of stealing people's jobs fear standpoint, but like from a usability standpoint, like from a I don't know, copyright or from a workflow, like a consistency standpoint, right? So, I mean, you've been using AI for creative work for a long time at this point. So you kind of given your pitch on, the value of it is basically, hey, you can use this with an artist in conjunction with an artist to sort of supplement, a much larger team, right? But how much work goes into training those models and making sure that, like, if you say you have a character for a video game, like, you would need a significant consistency across all of the artwork in order to publish that in any realistically acceptable sense.
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to address within that question is, I think that even within the art space, we often address AI as though it's going to replace artists. Like, even as artists, we talk about it like it's going to replace artists. And so the first thing I want to shift there is sort of volleyballing your question back, which is, if you could have 3/4 of your job taken care of in like 10 minutes, how much more creativity would that free you up for? Sorry, there's like a loud noise in the background. I apologize.
Oh, no, yeah, no worries.
It didn't come through.
Oh, good.
No, I think it depends because so just for quick qualification, like I have a bachelor's degree in digital painting and animation. I run Epic Made's whole art team, and I've been doing art basically my whole life. And so I am one of the artists out there who doesn't really like the process as much as I like the result. And so AI was especially early on, pretty enticing to me in general. Obviously, there's ethical pullback between whether or not it should be used, but I think the biggest issue that I have with it, and I'm not like a hardcore opponent of AI either. Like I said, I think it will, whether we like it or not, objectively be part of the process, and I don't think it can ever replace an artist for real.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So that's my level stance right now. But the nuanced part of that is, I think that good art requires a level of symbolism and control storytelling inputted into the artwork that I don't know is possible in your standard AI platform currently, right? And so telling it, I want the image of like a woman in a dark room, looking sad or whatever.
You okay, Ross? Sorry.
I read Berserk and also Hellboy.
It's fine. It's fine. That's what it came out like.
Yeah.
It's not a psychology class. I guess the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I think you could impart your own personal story into an image like that if an artist was given that prompt, as opposed to a machine which is going to generate sort of the least common denominator of what has been created up to this point.
Yeah, I think that it, to a degree, there's like, I think that to a degree you're right, but I think that I think it's easier if we sort of zoom out and look at like what makes an AI art tool, like what is it? Like, okay, let's define it first.
100%.
So, and we're using something called latent diffusion in most AI art tools. Like, that's the underpinning technology. And so when we think of a latent diffusion model, that's like basically latent diffusion means that there are no pixels. There are just latents. They're kind of like these echoes of images. they're not full images even, that the AI has put together because it's looked at images at one point. So it's looked at millions, billions of images, and then it's sort of like collected something called latents, which are just sort of these echoes of different aspects of those images. And now that exists in kind of this three-dimensional, hard to define space. And that's the generative AI model. But that's very different, or that's very separate from the tool that an artist is going to use. So an artist, when we're thinking of using a latent diffusion model, we're thinking of using something like Midjourney, maybe DALL-E. That's, I think, what comes to mind first and foremost. Or then more technical tools like using something called like Comfy UI, which is a certain type of workflow implementation of Stable Diffusion. You can also use something called Automatic 1111, another more technical workflow implementation of Stable Diffusion. And then there's like tons of other like smaller apps and startups that have basically put UI over Stable Diffusion to a greater or lesser degree. So I would say like separating Stable Diffusion and open source models, let's just say open source models in general, because Stable Diffusion is no longer the only open source model. There are different open source models that work with different tools now. So let's say open source models or black box models, which is like Midjourney, DALL-E. So these are the models. We can't really see what goes into them, and we really are beholden to the companies that are releasing them. I think most people are more familiar with those black box models because they're just a little easier to spin up, to be honest. Like, it's a little easier to use them. And to your point, I definitely think that, yes, there is validity in saying that if you were to prompt into one of these black box models, a sad woman in a dark room standing in a corner, it is going to wash it with an aesthetic that you didn't define. The reason it's doing that is really specific, though, and that's the piece I want to clarify. It's not doing that because it has taken all of this knowledge and it's sort of parsing it out. It's not actually smart enough to do that. It's doing that because over time, the companies that own those models have set up outside parameters, we could call them like brushes or filters. They're basically to a certain degree that because of how you wrote your prompt or your data in your workspace, they define you as liking. And then there's ways to hack that too. Like, they have ways to adjust it, to put like change the style, etc. And like Midjourney, for example, is releasing more and more ways because they've realized, actually most people don't really want to have just sort of a generic, generalized art style that is actually just sort of the most average version of what every user likes. Like, actually, that doesn't work. People hate that. So we're moving further and further away, just in general, even with the black box models, from that. Like, now with Midjourney, you can use things like sref codes, which basically are these codes that have an aesthetic tied to them. So you don't really need to know how to prompt. You can just be like, okay, I really like this sort of very specific dark aesthetic. I really want it to look like a washed out film scene. And someone has shared this code with you, and now you can prompt just in that code. So I don't think that's a perfect solution, but it is, from the black box model side, like far more of a solution. I don't really mess with those models as much. Sometimes I use them to like build data sets for training, because I can like go and curate those and refine what I want from it. I actually use open source materials a lot more. It takes a little bit of learning. There's more of a learning curve. There's far less like fun, friendly UI. But if you're coming from like a animation or a 3D background, I don't think you'd find it that intimidating. There's like 2 lines of code that you have to write ever, and then it is all just node based. So it becomes really, really easy at that stage. That is where I really, I'm going to put a lot of pushback on whether or not you're able to control your own style. Because if you were to prompt a sad woman standing in a corner in a dark room in that model...
I'm starting to regret the source material.
I keep changing it, but but if you were to prompt into that model, you would probably get something so generic that it's not even art, unless you did other tools. And no one would argue that it was art. Everyone would be like, yeah, that doesn't really look like anything. But that's because the expectation is for you to leverage other tools and other workflows. And that's where, to me, it gets really interesting. And as a creative, I'm like, there's endless possibilities. I mean, from an animation standpoint, they just released a tool this week. I think it's called Live Portrait or something like that, where literally if you just have either a video or stills of a person's face making different facial expressions, it will change the facial expressions of a single character in a frame. And I've seen a few examples. I'm going to try it myself because I'm always skeptical. But even the people I know in the space who are skeptical have been getting really good results from it. And that, like, from an animation standpoint, like, you could make half of an anime with that. Just being able to, like, change facial expressions with stills. Like, that's like, is you're 2/3 of the way done.
Just zoom in shots. Like, whoa,
but literally, you could do that with this technology. So, so I would say that with the more black box models, for sure, there are limitations that it's not super intuitive how to work around. And what I don't like about them, and I think most artists don't like about them, is that when you do have to work around them, it feels like you're hacking it, and that, like, doesn't feel right. It's like, well, no, I should be able to just get what I want from this art. But from the other side, if you're doing more technical work, it's insane how much you can actually control.
So, like, from a control standpoint, right? Like, style, I feel like, is one of those things that, like, how something is drawn is something I think most artists can wrap their head around being manipulatable, right? Like, even the SRF tools you're talking about, which I didn't know about, which is cool. I'll definitely look at that up to see if Midjourney becomes more stable for me. But the thing that I'm, I guess, more interested in is what is drawn in the, like, micro sense, right? Like, the way that there's symbolism in, like, the way that the shadows are cast in this room. There's symbolism in, like, and storytelling in what's on the wall. Like, there's things that basically from an outside perspective looking in, because I don't have that much experience, maybe more than the average artist at this point, but I don't have that much experience with AI platforms. It seems like you can't really effectively control those elements, at least in the black box models.
I mean, in Paint, like, add a clock at 4:32 on the wall here, because that's like some symbolism Easter egg. Like,
yeah, but you can't control, like, what the clock looks like, right? Like, I mean,
right. Yeah, so I would say that, for the black box models, that's why I don't really use them very much. For me, it's all about fine tuning, and that's where you can control every single element of that. You can say, like, okay, let's say ahead of time, you're like, I only want to deal with drawing 30 pictures. Like, I want to be able to draw 30 pictures and have defined the world that I'm generating in. But there's some, like, really specific things that I want. I want clocks to look like this because it symbolizes X. I want it has this type of lighting because it symbolizes Y. I want, I want the line work for how certain women look to be this way. But if I have a different concept attached to that woman, then the line work changes, maybe just in their eyes. Like, those are all things you can control with training, because it gives you the opportunity to introduce new concepts and new words. So the way that, like, fine tuning works is that you can have, you can technically use as many images you want, but I find that, like, 30 is sort of like the perfect amount, and you basically can assign words, whether they're actual captions, words the model would recognize, or if you want to be able to recall very specific stylistic things, you can also add your own unique words that the model just wouldn't recognize because they're not real words. Like, either one works, and you can start to leverage that to actually call forward very specific concepts You can also use a tool called IP adapters, which is like image prompting. And what that does is actually allows you to influence the image with an individual concept. So if you're like, okay, I kind of like all of this, but I really am not happy with how the clock looks in this image, you can actually mask out that area. You can quick sketch or draw a clock that you would prefer to be in that area and use this extra tool to basically, it won't do an exact, like, it won't just be like copy pasting it. It'll try to infer from the image you gave it what clock should look like. So it'll be slightly different from the image you gave it, but it will be in the same theme and style.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, Photoshop's, you know,
In that sense, you would need an art team or an artist to be influencing at that point.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. You could, that's the hard part. It's like, you could definitely use reference art, but then that starts to open the can of worms. Are you allowed to use reference art? How is that different from using reference art in your art team and giving it to an artist? You know, that's where it's like, it's sort of, you're parsing out, like, what is the ethics and morals of all of this? But certainly if you want to ensure that you have not introduced any data that you don't specifically own into your process, then you would probably want a couple artists.
Yeah, so I mean, what's interesting there is that what you're saying, and I guess a lot of people don't understand, is that these tools can be used in a vacuum where you're not stealing anybody else's stuff. Like, you're using, you know, now I imagine the original data set or the working, like, these things were all built off of something, an original brainchild, I think, right? I mean, maybe you clarify that a bit, but at this phase in the game, like, there's ways to, like, basically isolate out everything else and work just like, hey, we fed in these hundreds of images ourselves to make out this comic or these things or this character. And that's possible. And it works, is what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely what I'm saying. And there are models that are completely ethically sourced. They work directly with artists. So, like, that is an option for people. I just find that very few people are going for that option for whatever reason. And I think there's a variety of reasons. That being said, like, the original data set, huge data set, I do think it was a problem that it wasn't appropriately licensed, but I think that's a separate issue from this is just my personal opinion. I think that the licensure, it should be treated as a separate issue from the result, because the process that the training went through after that issue around licensing has so greatly distanced itself from the original work that unless it's such an iconic piece of art that it was somehow in the data set hundreds of thousands of times, like Mona Lisa, for example, it shouldn't be coming through. And also, you can't just prompt a woman smiling and get the Mona Lisa. You would actually need to intentionally do it. So I think, for me, I think that there's a lot of possible debates on both sides for whether or not the original data set was appropriately used, and also whether or not we should change data privacy. I think that for me is the bigger concern. It's like,
right,
probably this was appropriately sourced given how data privacy was treated up until that point, but maybe that was a mistake and maybe we should have been paying attention to that sooner.
Yeah, I mean, anything you post on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, I think that there are clauses that basically say, hey, we can kind of like decide to use this.
Yeah. 100%. And the guild, for instance, the Graphic Artist Guild, was hugely against that early on. It was a big stink that the guild made. And, like, basically at the end of the day, like, people just didn't care, right? Like, and everyone mass adopted to them, and regardless of what their, you know, licenses are and terms. So, you know, and then now it's a space where it's like, hey, if you don't use this, then you're not relevant. So it's like, everyone's there. So,
but
good.
For me, what's more important is, okay, let's say that this was this massive monster that ate everyone's art. Like, let's call it that, because that is what a lot of the art community wants to say it is, and I'm not uncomfortable saying that. Then, from my perspective, and this might just be my personality, I want artists to be the ones benefiting from that at the end of the day. And frankly, it's going to take years, if not decades, to get some sort of payout from it. But it'll take much less time. I've looked at like the internal workings of some of these huge studios and stuff who are trying to use it. They can't use it fast enough. They're not going to catch up. But, can an indie studio, a single artist, you can leverage this now and actually like profit off of it far sooner than any massive corporation is going to be able to.
Yeah, bridging the gap quickly. I see this a lot of ways, and there's a lot of parallels in my head of so when the internet boomed and you started to be able to do mass logistic things with computers and internet and online ordering and automation, it's like all of a sudden you could open up a supply shop just out of your garage and source to different warehouses. And so it's kind of the same thing on that level. Like the smaller, more nimble companies like artists, right? In this case, can do a whole comic or do an animated series and get that done with 3 or 4 artists rather than a whole crazy sheet of artists that you need. It's when you see Unity and all these game engines come out, there's so much stuff they can do now with just 2 or 3 people that would have taken teams of 50, 60, hundreds to make a Nintendo game. You can do that now by yourself, right? So the same kind of vibe here, look, corporate America is going to corporate America, and, not just America, but large corporations, they are absolutely going to get to a space in the near future where they're demanding way more of every single person to use AI and produce what they used to get out of one artist. They want to get 10 times that, right? That said, when an artist has that level of skill, now they've got choices, right? Now it's hey, do I really want to work here for this company? Or do I want to grab my buddy Fred over here on this other line of cubicles and we'll go do our own thing, right? So I think that is becoming more and more of an option. There's going to be an empowering side of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to ignore the part of it that is really hard. I think that I completely understand and feel for people who are just purely technical artists who maybe don't have a lot of specific projects that they're planning to do other than their refined technical art. And I think their jobs are in danger. And I think that is really hard. But that's true in every industry. Every technician right now does it. Coders, anyone who doesn't have the creative drive to create their own thing is in a perilous place. And that's something as society we need to deal with, not just on an individual artist to artist level.
100%.
Does AI as used in an open source context call into question copyright? Because I know it does in the black box models.
I mean, it calls into question copyright in every model, but I think so here's the part where I've talked to a lot of copyright lawyers about this, and I've even filed for my own copyright, and there's 2 really big pieces that have come forth from it. The first one is I've heard this from lawyers on both sides, on every level, and this is not legal advice. This is just generally a sentiment that I've heard, but is the original training data is separate from an individual's output. Those will be handled separately. Those are separate cases, separate conversations. From the Copyright Office, although yes, it is not. You don't have the same you don't have copyright protection for a single image that you've generated by itself. You do have copyright protection, and this is confirmed. We know this is true, and it often gets forgotten about. If you make a piece of work that includes AI art in it, of course it is protected by copyright. Just the AI art components are not protected under copyright law individually. However, IP law is not beholden to copyright law. So you still can you can still follow the proper channels in IP law if you have a character that is your IP and you want to trademark it, etc. Those are still channels that are open to you. Those aren't shared. Those aren't the same as copyright law. And so there's in the copyright conversations, I hear this a lot, but the conversations I've had with lawyers have consistently been separate from the data set. The output on its own has not yet been granted copyright protection, although it is going under review right now. So there's probably going to be an update in the copyright laws in the next couple of years. We know that for sure. They had this big open period where different companies or groups or lawyers could submit inquiries. I know the Graphic Artists Guild did. And that what was the last piece? That, yeah, IP law is your friend if you want to really protect yourself and you're creating with AI art. But the question...
You own the character design initially anyway. Like,
right, yeah.
You will use AI to generate the character from scratch.
Yeah.
And you actually own the design of the character and can prove that. And you're just using AI to proliferate that design.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is like, the other piece around this is I have yet to hear of a case where someone has successfully said, because I think my data was in this original base data set, your final image that you created as an individual creator is not valid. I don't even think that's being argued right now. I think the arguments happening right now are whether or not the base models, without being adjusted at all, should have to pay these artists for having potentially used them. That's all I've heard.
Right. Yeah, and the IP side basically all revolves around human authorship, right? So, like, right. Who authored this? Is it a bot or is it a human, right? Like, is it code or a human? And then distinguishing into the nuance of that is where all the legal battles are going, right? Because, like, well, a human created the code, right? So then it's just like it starts to get deeper and kind of more interesting there. But
well, and if you develop the character using some AI components, but you developed the character yourself for a story, then I think it's pretty easy to argue that a long form story, you can't just generate a long form story with AI. That is an intentional act. That's nearly an impossible thing to do.
Yeah, it's not like you're it's not like you're, like you said, it's not like you're just hitting a button and prompting a singular image. You yourself, like the AI itself, can't craft a long form story and output it. You would have to intentionally put that together and piecemeal it, which at the very least, all of the IP associated with that is copyright or is yours. At the highest level, a large majority of it would still be copyrightable in its final form, even if the individual components aren't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Now I'm seeing, like, and this is sort of tangential, but like some of these trade shows that everyone goes to now, they're no longer allowing people to bring, fan art, right? Like, you can't draw Darth Vader and sell prints of it at this which was always illegal, but now it seems like they're cracking down more because there's so much craziness in the world of IP. I just find that interesting. I wonder if they're related. Maybe not, but who knows?
Yeah, I think, like, I know for like some fan art, like, you can get an official license from Disney to sell fan art, and then they'll allow you, if you're like an artist who does fan art, but you have to like apply very specifically, and I think there's like a license agreement and stuff.
I'm sure that's not easy to do.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's quite a few hoops and barriers there. Anyhow, so
there you go. So we are coming up on time, and I feel like we're at a pretty decent moment. So before we wrap up, we did have one last question for you, Minta. Is there anywhere or anything in your career that you've come across that you'd like to shout out to the audience? Something that they might want to look up?
Yeah, I've recently been working with and using a lot in my own work this platform Glyph, GILF, and it actually lets you use both image generation models and LLMs to create these really cool advanced workflows and little apps. They have an API that I think they're going to be releasing more publicly in the near future, and just generally, like, I think from a creator standpoint, first of all, it's a really cool tool, and second of all, or platform rather, and second of all, it unlocks the amount of complexity that you can do as an artist or a creator. So I really like it. I think it's a lot of fun. And if you're really creative, it's limitless potential kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Appreciate that.
Definitely check that out. GLIPH?
GLIF.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Glyph.
A millennial likely owns it. That is, they spelled it weird.
Sure.
Maybe. Yeah, probably.
because everything else is owned, right? Like that's a whole other problem.
Yeah.
It's like you can't trademark a style, but if they did, you better believe in 2 generations, corporations would own every style, and you wouldn't be able to make it. Like it's like music these days, right? Like you can't even make a beat from your head because you might have heard it somewhere else, and now somebody already owns that beat. You got to pay royalties. It's like crazy.
Oh no, that's just the joke is that like as a millennial myself, like most millennials like name their kid like the name is John, but like it's JAAHN.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I know that one.
But
nothing but weird names over here in my family, so I get it.
Yeah, same.
Cool. Well, huge shout out to the Graphic Artist Guild, which is where Minta and I met. On the advocacy board, looking into just figuring out about AI and all the things. So really, really stoked to have met you there, and glad we've continued being friends and doing things together here. So
Same.
yeah.
We've been speaking with Minta Carlson, artist and creative consultant. You can check out her website at promptcrafted.com, which will also be below. But if listeners want to follow up with you directly, Minta, where should they go?
You can just email me, Minta at promptcrafted.com is totally fine. MINTA. I'm also on Twitter. I guess people call it X now, as @Minta_K. I don't call it X.
No one calls it X.
But I do post. I think I blocked him. I do post a lot on there though, because it's so easy to post there. So
I think we rambled over your handle. What's your handle there on Twitter?
Araminta, ARAMINTA_K.
Okay, awesome. All right, Minta. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you, and thank you everybody for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.
Oh, thank you guys.
Peace.
We really hope you enjoyed the show. Please like and subscribe to join us on our next journey through the world of art and business on the Pixel Retentive Podcast.